sustainability, and the safety and quality of the food. So these are the main pillars why they developed this gap. Next slide, please. So that turned out to be a global gap. And based on that, FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, they are very much interested in promoting this global gap into the developing nations where a lot of production is happening. And they are very keen on the Asian countries. And currently, this gap is being accepted worldwide, and more than 130 countries adopted this global gap. However, on the same structure, a lot of countries have developed their own gap with minor tweaking, minor changes, but still following the global gap. So, for example, Thailand, they use Thai gap, or in Vietnam, they use Viet gap. In New Zealand, we do have a Viet gap, New Zealand gap. That's what the farmers had to abide by the rules or the regulations, what the gaps are. For example, someone earlier talking about the traceability of product. So, for example, if I go in a supermarket and buy a apple, I can tell, or someone can tell, that from which farm that apple has been brought in the supermarket, even the farmer. So if there is something wrong with the produce, it can be still directly linked to the farmers. So that's the biggest thing, and that's very important, that the produce what is sold in the market should be tracked. Next slide, please. So this is just the general structure. I'm not going to talk about that much, but this is the board which governs the global gap, and they regulate the technical people, like what's happening, what should be the protocols for agriculture or for the dairy, or who are the one who is going to certifying the global gap. So this is run by a member or a board. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about New Zealand. So New Zealand also has its own gap, but it's very much similar to the global gap. And we have like three main goals: the food safety, environment, and social practice, as the global gap is. Next slide, please. So can anyone tell me what is this crop on the ground? Any idea what is this look like? Any guess? Tea or wheat? Okay. So I'll show you. Can you move on to the next slide? And next, please. This is what it is. Onion. So you can think of how big a farmer is growing an onion, and how he is going to manage the insects and the other requirement for the onion. So they have to do in a very industrial level. And so one time when I moved to New Zealand, when I went there, and I was here for a PhD, I got a scholarship to do a PhD. And I was asking, hey, you guys growing so much grasses. If this place was in India, we should have been growing a lot of wheat. And do you know what that professor was laughed at me? Rashmi, you were telling something we have been doing for a long time ago. Because you know why we are not growing wheat? Because that's not profitable. We can get the wheat very cheap from all over the world. So why do we choose to grow the wheat? And that's what the agriculture or horticulture here in New Zealand is. So what they do produce a very high premium quality produce. So even like the one of the market in China, I mean they do grow their onions or their apples, but a lot of our trade goes to China because we don't produce organic, I'm telling you. We do manage to reduce the no uh, pesticide residue in the product. It's not organic, but we still use the chemicals or fertilizer. But there is a term you might have heard, MRL, maximum residual limit. And this is the important thing for the export. And the same produce, the onion sold in China from their own country, and the New Zealand produced apple or onion is sold 2 or 3 times expensive than their own. So this is what I want to tell. Is not always the organic, but we have to look at the big picture. And it's not just one part of that. Organic is fine, but why not looking for the other 95% of the produce as well? And that is being managed by the with the help of GAP. Next slide, please. So, I mean, the GAP, what we follow here is very strategic, very dynamic. It's not like one time we made a plan and it's running for 15 years. No, every 5 year we have a strategy for what would be there, what would be the focus on the GAP, or what would be the values. What we still have to follow our values like safety, sustainability, and the trust. The people trust, like whatever we produce in a brand, New Zealand apple or something, which has got to still be trusted. It can be tested anywhere in any lab, and you will never find the residue level above the MRL which is required. So a lot of consignment from other countries are rejected, but because we developed our own horticulture in a way through the GAP that our produce is sold everywhere. We can't even produce what is the demand for the New Zealand product is. So this is a little bit of different kind of horticulture. I understand that this is the farmers are much having a big land scale, and that could be the reason, one of the reason. But I just want to tell that that should be the vision for overall for the Indian horticulture or agriculture as well. Like how do we safeguard not just the organic produce but also the other 95% of the agriculture produce. We don't want anyone to die with the pesticide residue because the organic produce can be bought by only a few people who has a lot of money. But what about the general middle class or lower middle class people? So we have to look after those people and develop a strategy so that the whole food production should be safer. And that's what we have achieved here in New Zealand. Next slide, please. We worked in we worked as a scientist in the organization, a government organization here, but we also work as a consultant for different governments. Sometimes we have been working in Himachal for the last 5 years on developing or producing a better apple or high quality apple. Similar, I was working in Vietnam. Recently, we finished a project on uh, uh, safe vegetables. So you will be very surprised to hear that in Vietnam, the pesticide is one of the biggest issues. Farmers are spraying even uh, twice a day. They spray sometimes pesticide even 2 times a day. And it's such a issue of the safe food or pesticide residue. We jumped in to help them out. And through the GAP, we're trying to develop their own brand. And through the branding, as somebody was telling, branding is very important, marketing is very important. And the most important thing, what we trying to help them is the collaborative approach. Like somebody was talking about the Amul or cooperative. Yes, it is really, really important. One farmer cannot do everything. You need to come together and make a good team of working. So we come up with like a farmers who can have a post-harvest facility for washing their produce, and they can invest something on like a ozone washing. And now this, they could sell their produce only in the wet market, like a road market. but now their produce are sold even in the big cities just because of the branding that their vegetable is much safer. They're using developed a gap, a good agriculture practices in a way that it is contaminated with any uh, chemical or pesticide. Okay, next slide, please.
Dr. Nasmi, you have to be a little brief now. So next
Yeah,
two
sure.
slide, please.
So again, just in the Bangladesh, they have the government had just started say that no agro export without GAP certification. So Bangladesh also produce a lot of vegetables and export, and they are asked to everyone needs to follow the GAP. Next slide, please. Is there a gap exist in India? I think yes. I'm not sure how many people are aware of this gap. Can someone, I can't see the audience, but can someone tell it how many people are aware of India gap? Yeah. Okay. So I mean this. That's why I had this presentation just to bring some awareness. Like there is a gap existing in India based on the global gap approach. And I think I am very sure I have written it. Lack of awareness is there, and that could be one of the way. Whoever the farmers or the farmers groups are, they should contact. There is a, I think, quality some council of India which manage this gap. There is a training program and other things going on through that. It's not very old, but recently they started. But it's a good idea. Two people should be aware of that. Next slide, please. And they have different components like how do you work with the soil or planting, what kind of planting material. I'm talking about the India gap. So these are the components, and the pesticides is very important. This is more like awareness for the people who are interested and wanted to know that. They should contact and look at this the Quality Council of India for more information. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mean, this is just a generalized slide. So, like when you use the insecticide, obviously it is a lot of different chemicals are being used for the killing the bacteria or the insects. Is different mites is acaricide. So all different chemicals. So it's the safety of the people who are working is very important, as well as the safety of the people who are consuming the produce. Because we have already talked about, somebody talked about that. So yeah, both things are important. So somebody, when you apply insecticide or something, you must look at the withholding period. So if you don't, for example, it says that you can harvest the produce after 1 week. If you harvest before a week, then a lot of insecticide is still sitting in the fruit or the produce, and it will be harm to the people who are going to be consumers. So there are quite a few things. We have running time, so we'll go. How can we minimize that? Sometimes insects become resistant. So we put there a lot of chemicals and are not killed. So there is some strategy through the gap which can help rotate the insecticides, and some selective insecticides need to be used. If you can manage without insects, that's great. But I don't think so. In this world, it's very hard to manage the crop without the insecticide or some chemicals. Anyway, next slide, please. So what do you see here in this photograph? The three photos. Yeah, so you see the different level of safe handling of the insecticide. The people on the right, he is completely open, and he is actually eating or getting his body with insecticide more than what he is throwing in the crops. Because most of the time, insecticides are very sensitive to the end, like your head. The head must be covered, or your
मैं
hands
भी
or
ऐसे
the
ही करता
fingers
हूँ
or the
विदाउट
feet. It is very
ले लेने
important
का
that those
मेरे को
things
मिलेगा ना यहाँ 300
are, should must be
ये लेके
covered.
जाना
So the second person has covered his face, but is
बीमारी
walking
आएगी
वो भी
barefoot,
रामपुर
so
में
he is
पूछा था रामपुर में
taking
था
up
नहीं
a lot of
है
insecticide. It's
खराब है
not mass, not eating,
हल्के वाला
but
होगा
it's absorbed through his feet. And the third
ग्रीन
person
मिलेगा ना
who is doing
ये
much
लेके
better, and I think that's the best way. He can apply and use the
और से
plant
पूरी दुनिया
protection.
इसके लिए रोटी की ऑर्गेनिक कर सकती है
Person
तो
who could
जबरदस्त यार
जबरदस्त
Okay, next
लग
slide.
रहा है
Yeah. So again,
Canchua.
compost. So I mean, we talked about the making compost. I'm just going very briefly, and I'm telling you a very real story. Like in Vietnam, they've been using the compost. You see that, but what happened? They put the compost back in the crop, even they are not decomposed. And so, what happened? The veggies, vegetables, are contaminated with bacteria, listeria, and so many other things. And people are getting sick. So, it's not just a compost, but compost needs to be totally, completely decomposed. And that's when you can actually apply the compost. Otherwise, it will be much more vulnerable and contaminated. And people who are eating going to get sick. It's very hard to get that out even after washing. Anyways, thank you. Next one, please. Similarly, fertilizer, so people putting nitrogen, a lot of nitrogen. I'm not talking about organic, it's normal farming. So what happens if you're putting people thinking more nitrogen, more production? No, it's not happen. More nitrogen will cause a lot of insect problem, and I'm sure the people who are aware of that. It also affects the pH, and the soil condition will be definitely be affected. Next slide, please. Okay, click next one. So, I mean, just giving an example. I mean, I might not Joginder will agree with that. This is what a lot of farmers were growing the apples, the seedling varieties in Himachal. Next slide. And so we showed them this is what we grow in New Zealand. That's what our apple tree is look like. And say that, oh, this is not going to fruit enough. Look at the fruits in our the tree. Can you go to the next slide, please?
इस पे आएगी नहीं
And when we showed that, look at that. Now you can compare the trees here in Himachal and see how much area one tree can get. So, yeah, as I told in the beginning, we are very much keen on producing a premium product, just like the GAP certified product. It's not organic, I'm telling again, but it is fetching much more price than something grown in America organic and something grown as a GAP standard in New Zealand. And New Zealand produce are getting much more money than the American organic product. I'm telling you the truth. Okay, next slide. I'm almost finished. This is what we've been doing in the Vietnam, and we're trying to do some spray calibration. And what the people using there was like how much the insecticide using, and we just changed their sprayer, a different kind of a sprayer, and that reduced the half of the insecticide straight away just by changing a type of sprayer. Next slide, please. And I mean, this gun sprayer was so effective that it covered the whole tree. This is a mango tree. We're talking about the mango tree here, and with just a quarter or half of the insecticide used, and which give them a much better result compared to what they have been using. During the 50%, half of the time, and labor cost. So finally, I would say that this is a summary. Like GAP is a strategy, and this is not organic, but I think at some stage the government has to look into the how to just for the 5%, but 95% of the produce. And this is obviously it's a step-by-step approach, and it will promote absolutely producers as well as consumers in both safety and collaboration or cooperation with the farmers itself. Teamwork is very important to achieve that, and obviously follow the requirements. And I think we should also look into, apart from organic, we also should look into the advocacy for the GAP, good agriculture practices in India. All right. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions if you have.
What is the protocol you have drones in the future now? Or any machinery like drone? In the
Yeah. For multiple purposes, So, for example, you need to look into the disease infestation in the crop. So you saw that how the onion is that it's very hard for anyone to go and check the onion plant, each of them or in the group. So we put a camera on through the drone and we map the whole area with the drone, like is there a disease issues, and through the satellite. So that's the one. Another thing, some farmers also started use of drone for the pesticide spraying, because it also gives the load small droplets. And the third, we use a technical insect, what is it? SIT. So like we make the insect a sterile insect technology, and we release those insects in the field. And when they mate with the female can't produce eggs. So that's where we are using the drones in other way. So these are some of the areas we are using the drones. Is that a question?
Yes. Okay, friends, there may be a question, but things is that we are late. So now we have the three speakers. So maybe one speaker we can accommodate now, and after that we'll break for the lunch and the things will continue. So let me